At my son's wedding, his bride told me to leave, shouting, "You're not welcome here. Go away." Within an hour, I had cancelled all the wedding payments, and what I had prepared next shocked her. The words sliced through the cheerful chatter of the reception hall. A shard of glass in a bowl of cream. For a moment the world seemed to tilt, the soft glow of the fairy lights blurring into a painful, indistinct smear. Pamela stood before me, her face a mask of cold fury beneath the delicate lace of her veil. My son Nathan stood just behind her, his hand on her arm, his expression a perfect hollow blank. He said nothing. That silence was the real blow, the one that cracked the foundations of the world I had so carefully, so lovingly built for him. It was a silence I knew all too well, a hollow echo of the one his father, Timothy, had used as a weapon for 30 years. My life with Timothy had been a long, slow lesson in erasure. I learned to make myself small, to fold my opinions and desires into neat, manageable squares and tuck them away where they wouldn't inconvenience him. He was a man who commanded space, in a room, in a conversation, in a marriage. My role was to be the quiet, supportive framework for his grand existence. When he decided our marriage was over, he announced it with the same casual authority he used to order dinner, leaving me with a son to raise and a heart full of fractures. Nathan became my world. Every penny I earned, every ounce of energy I had was poured into him. I was determined he would never feel the chill of his father's indifference. I wanted him to be different, to be a man who was kind, who was present, who valued the love he was given. I see now that in my desperate attempt to shield him from Timothy's coldness, I had instead insulated him from reality, wrapping him in a cocoon of unconditional support that left him with no spine of his own. When Nathan announced his engagement to Pamela, I was cautiously optimistic. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed to adore him. I saw her as the daughter I never had. I welcomed her into our small family, which was really just Nathan and me, with open arms and an open wallet. They were young, just starting out, and I wanted them to have the perfect beginning. "We want a fairy tale wedding, Mom," Nathan had said, his eyes shining with a familiar, hopeful light that I could never deny. And so the fairy tale began, funded entirely by the inheritance my parents had left me. Money I had guarded fiercely for my old age, a nest egg meant to provide security in my final years. But what was security compared to my son's happiness? I liquidated stocks, dipped into savings, and justified every expense as an investment in his future. The venue was a historic manor with sprawling gardens, the kind of place you see in magazines. The flowers were cascades of peonies and roses, their scent filling every corner. The caterer was a renowned chef, the band a lively ensemble that promised to keep everyone dancing. I handled every contract, every deposit, every negotiation. Pamela would point to a picture in a glossy magazine, and I would make it a reality. "Oh, Betty, you're a lifesaver," she would coo, squeezing my arm. "We could never do this without you." Nathan would just smile, his passive, pleasant smile, the one that meant he was content to let things happen around him. Looking back, the red flags were not just flags, they were giant waving banners. There was the time Pamela dismissed my suggestion for the cake flavor with a condescending laugh, telling the baker, "Don't listen to her, her taste is a bit dated." Nathan had just shrugged. There was the incident with the guest list, where my few requested invitations for close family friends were pushed aside to make room for Pamela's parents' business associates. "It's about networking, Betty," she had explained, as if I were a child. "This is more than just a party." I ignored the subtle digs, the dismissive glances. I told myself it was just wedding stress. I was the mother of the groom, a supporting role. My job was to be helpful, to be quiet, and to pay the bills. I had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of being invisible for the comfort of others, a skill honed in the crucible of my marriage to Timothy. I had mistaken my self-negation for love, my sacrifice for devotion. I believed that by giving everything I would finally be seen, be valued. The wedding day was supposed to be the culmination of that belief, the beautiful, triumphant finale to my lifelong project of motherhood. I arrived at the manor early, my dress a tasteful shade of silver blue, my heart fluttering with a nervous pride. I watched Nathan at the altar, so handsome in his tuxedo, and I felt a surge of overwhelming love. This was it. This was his happiness and by extension mine. The ceremony was beautiful. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause was deafening. At the reception, I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations on their behalf, my smile feeling genuine for the first time in a long while. I felt a sense of accomplishment, of a job well done. Then I saw Pamela's mother, a woman as polished and cold as marble, gesturing for me to come over to their table. "Betty," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Pamela was just saying that the seating arrangement is a little cluttered up here at the head table." I looked at the table, where a place card with my name sat next to Nathan. "Oh," I said, confused. I thought this was the arrangement we all agreed on. Pamela appeared at her mother's side, her smile gone, replaced by a tight, brittle line. "Things have changed," she said. "We need this seat for a very important business partner of my father's." "You understand." She didn't wait for an answer. She simply picked up my place card, tore it in half and dropped it on the floor. "There's a small table over there," she said, gesturing vaguely towards a dim corner near the kitchen entrance. "You can sit there." The air left my lungs. It was such a small thing, a place card, but it was a deliberate public demotion. It was a statement. I looked at Nathan, my eyes pleading with him to intervene, to say something, anything. He just looked down at his shoes, his shoulders hunched. He was a ghost in his own life story. I felt a familiar, cold dread creeping up my spine. This was Timothy all over again, the casual cruelty, the public humiliation, the expectation that I would simply absorb it and disappear. But I couldn't. Not this time. Not after everything. I stood my ground, my voice trembling slightly. "Pamela, I am the groom's mother. I paid for this entire event. My place is at this table with my son." That was when the mask of civility shattered completely. Pamela's face contorted with a rage that was shocking in its intensity. Her voice rose, sharp and ugly, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "You paid for it?" she shrieked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You think that buys you a seat at my table? This is my day. It's not about you. You've done your part, you wrote the checks. Now you're just in the way." The words were like stones, each one striking a different part of me. Guests were turning to stare, their champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. The music seemed to falter. And then came the final devastating blow. "You're not welcome here," she spat, her eyes burning with a venom I couldn't comprehend. "Go away." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking all the air, all the joy, all the love out of the room. Every eye was on me, then on Nathan, waiting. This was his moment to become the man I had always hoped he would be. To defend his mother, to stand for decency, to show an ounce of the loyalty I had showered upon him his entire life. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sort of panicked helplessness, and then he looked away, back at his new wife, and said nothing. He chose her. He chose this. In that deafening silence, he confirmed that my role in his life was now officially over. My function as a walking, talking bank account had been fulfilled. Something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. It turned to dust and blew away on the cold wind of his betrayal. The hurt was so immense, so profound that it went beyond tears. It was a physical sensation, a crushing weight on my chest, a sudden icy numbness in my limbs. I turned without another word. I walked away from the head table, past the gawking guests with their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I walked through the grand hall I had paid for, past the towering floral arrangements I had chosen, and out the heavy oak doors into the cool evening air. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the route I took. I remember the feeling of the steering wheel, cold and solid beneath my trembling hands, the only real thing in a world that had suddenly become thin and unreal. When I got home, I walked into my quiet, empty house and sat on the sofa in my silver blue dress. The silence in my home was different from the silence at the wedding. This was a peaceful silence. A knowing silence. It was the silence of a long, painful chapter finally, irrevocably coming to an end. For an hour I sat there motionless, as the shock receded and was replaced by something else. It was an anger so pure and cold it felt like a block of ice forming in my chest. It wasn't a hot screaming rage. It was a quiet, clarifying fury. This wasn't just about Pamela's cruelty or Nathan's cowardice. It was about Timothy. It was about my sister Christina, who always took his side. It was about a lifetime of being told in 1,000 different ways that my needs, my feelings, my very presence were secondary. I had allowed them to define my worth for decades. I had accepted their valuation of me as a service provider, a convenience, a background character. The woman who had walked out of that wedding was not the same one who had walked in. The old Betty, the accommodating, self-sacrificing, invisible Betty, had died in that reception hall. A new one was being forged in the ice of this newfound anger. My first thought was clear, simple, and utterly liberating. The fairy tale was over, and the fairy godmother was taking her magic back. I went to my study, my movements calm and deliberate. I pulled out the thick folder labeled Nathan's Wedding. Inside were all the contracts, all the invoices, all the proof of payments I had made. I had paid deposits for everything, but the final, substantial balances were all due by the end of the event, charged to my credit card or to be paid by check the following Monday. I looked at the clock. It was just after 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening. I picked up the phone. The first call was to the venue manager. I had his personal number for emergencies. "Hello, this is Betty Taylor," I said, my voice steady and even. "I am calling to inform you that there has been a significant development. I am the sole financier of the Taylor-Weldon wedding, and I am officially withdrawing all financial responsibility, effective immediately. All charges that were to be placed on my card are to be cancelled. You will need to seek final payment from the bride and groom, Nathan and Pamela Taylor." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Ma'am? The reception is in full swing. I can't just..." I cut him off. "That is not my concern. I have been publicly ejected from the event by the bride. As such, my financial support is also ejected. You have a contract with them and you will have to take it up with them. Do not charge my card." I hung up before he could argue. One by one I went down the list. I left a firm, unequivocal voicemail for the caterer. I sent a concise, formal email to the florist, the bakery, and the band's agent, and my personal email to have a time-stamped record. To whom it may concern, please be advised that as of 9:15 p.m. this evening, I, Betty Taylor, have withdrawn all promised funds for the wedding of Nathan Taylor and Pamela Weldon. All outstanding invoices must be directed to the newlyweds. Any attempt to charge the cards on file will be disputed as fraudulent. With each call, with each email sent, the block of ice in my chest seemed to shrink, replaced by a growing sense of power. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, if ever. It was the feeling of holding the pen and writing my own story, instead of letting others write it for me. I knew the fallout would be swift, and I was not wrong. The first call was from a hysterical Nathan an hour later. "Mom, what did you do? The venue manager just came and shut off the music. He said you canceled the payment. He wants the final balance now or he's kicking everyone out." His voice was high-pitched with panic. There was no apology, no concern for how I was. Just raw selfish fear. "Yes, Nathan, I did," I replied calmly. "You and your wife made it very clear that I was not welcome. I simply extended that sentiment to my bank account," he sputtered. "But you can't do that. It's my wedding." "It was my money," I said, the words as hard and final as steel. "You stood by and watched your bride humiliate me. You said nothing. Your silence was your choice. This is my choice." I hung up the phone. The siege began in earnest. My phone lit up with calls and texts from Pamela, her parents, and then, inevitably, from Timothy. He hadn't called me in 5 years, but he called that night. His voice was the same old gravelly thunder, the one that used to make me shrink. "Betty, what the hell do you think you're doing? You're embarrassing the family. Fix this." Now the old me would have dissolved into apologies and frantic attempts to smooth things over. The new me simply said, "There is no family for me to embarrass anymore, Timothy. This has nothing to do with you." I ended the call. The most painful message came from my own sister, Christina. "Betty, you're overreacting. It's a stressful day. You know how brides can be. Don't ruin this for Nathan. Timothy is furious with you. Her words were a casual betrayal, a reminder that even my own sister had long ago been absorbed into Timothy's orbit, siding with his power over her own blood. I didn't reply. I just turned off my phone, severing the final link to their chaotic, toxic world. I slept that night more deeply than I had in decades. The next morning I knew I needed help. This was going to get ugly. I wasn't just fighting a spoiled bride and a weak-willed son. I was fighting the deeply entrenched system of manipulation that Timothy had perfected over a lifetime. I searched online for family law attorneys, looking for someone who looked strong, someone who looked like they didn't take nonsense from anyone. I found Felicia Harris. Her photo exuded a calm, no-nonsense competence. I called her office first thing Monday morning and was surprised when she agreed to see me that very afternoon. Sitting in Felicia's plush office, I told her everything. I told her about Timothy, about my quiet life, about my hopes for Nathan, and about the brutal humiliation at the wedding. I expected judgment or perhaps pity. Instead, she listened with an intense, focused empathy. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Betty," she said, her voice firm but kind, "you have been a victim of profound emotional and financial abuse for a very long time. What you did on Saturday night was not an overreaction. It was a revolution." Tears pricked my eyes. To have my reality validated so completely by a stranger was an incredibly powerful experience. "They will not make this easy," Felicia continued, her tone shifting to one of strategy. "They will try to manipulate you, guilt you, and perhaps even threaten you. Our job is to build a fortress around you, legally and emotionally, that they cannot penetrate." She laid out a plan. First, we would send cease and desist letters to Timothy and Pamela's parents, warning them against any further contact. Second, we would review every single financial transaction related to the wedding to ensure I could legally defend my withdrawal of funds. "You paid the deposits, which fulfilled your initial promise," she explained. "The final payments were contingent on the event proceeding as planned, with you as a guest of honor. They broke the social contract. We will argue they broke the financial one as well." She gave me a list of documents to gather: bank statements, credit card bills, and copies of all the contracts I had signed. That evening, I began the grim task of poring over months of financial records. It was a painful archaeological dig into my own foolishness. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars on flowers, on food, on a dress Pamela would wear only once. Each transaction was a monument to my desperate need for my son's affection. As I was scrolling through my credit card statements, my finger hovering over a charge for the caterer, another line item caught my eye. It was a single large charge from a few weeks prior. The merchant was listed as Crestview Properties LLC. I didn't recognize the name. It was for exactly $15,000. My heart began to pound. I had not made this charge. I searched the company online. They were a luxury apartment developer. A new building had just opened downtown, a trendy upscale place that Nathan and Pamela had swooned over, saying it was their dream building, but lamenting that they could never afford the down payment. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. I clicked through the building's website, my hand shaking. There it was on their payment portal page. A $15,000 deposit is required to secure a 2-bedroom unit, the exact amount. The timing was just 2 days after I had given Pamela my credit card to pay the deposit for the wedding cake. She must have written the number down. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just entitlement or disrespect anymore. This was calculated, premeditated theft. She had used my money to secure her future, believing that once the wedding was over and she was officially Mrs. Taylor, I would either not notice or be too cowed to do anything about it. Her cruelty at the wedding now made a sickening kind of sense. She didn't need me anymore. She had already taken what she wanted. My utility had expired, so I was to be disposed of. I felt a wave of nausea, but the anger that followed was sharp and clear, cutting through the sickness. This was the hidden advantage Felicia had talked about, the piece of leverage I never knew I had. This was no longer just a family drama. This was a crime. The next day, I was back in Felicia's office, the credit card statement laid out on her desk like a confession. She looked at the charge, then at me, and a slow, grim smile spread across her face. "Well, Betty," she said, tapping the paper with her pen, "this changes everything. Pamela Weldon has just handed us a gift-wrapped felony." She explained the legal ramifications of credit card fraud and theft. We had them, not just on moral grounds but on legal ones. Felicia immediately contacted the credit card company to report the fraudulent charge and began drafting a letter to Pamela and Nathan. It was a masterclass in legal devastation. It laid out the facts of the fraud in cold, undeniable detail. It stated our intention to press criminal charges unless the $15,000 was returned immediately. And as a final brutal flourish, it included copies of the canceled payment notices from every wedding vendor, along with a formal demand that Nathan and Pamela assume full liability for all outstanding debts. The letter was sent via courier, requiring a signature upon delivery. We knew it would be a bomb detonating in their new life. The response was not long in coming. This time, the call was not from a hysterical Nathan, but from a man who introduced himself as Pamela's father's lawyer. The tone was no longer bullying but clipped and nervous. He wanted to discuss a resolution. Felicia handled the call, putting him on speakerphone so I could listen. "There is nothing to discuss," Felicia said, her voice like ice. "Your client's daughter committed felony fraud. The $15,000 will be returned via wire transfer to my firm's trust account by 5 o'clock tomorrow. If it is not, we will be at the district attorney's office the following morning. Furthermore, my client, Miss Taylor, will not be contributing a single cent more to the wedding fiasco. That debt belongs to your clients and the Taylor family." The lawyer blustered and tried to negotiate, suggesting I had gifted the money, that it was all a misunderstanding. Felicia was immovable. "There is no misunderstanding. A $15,000 fraudulent charge, counselor. 5 o'clock tomorrow." She hung up. For the first time, I felt the tables had truly turned. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the supplicant, the victim, the doormat. I was the one holding all the cards. The fear I had lived with for so long was gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. I had found my spine. The next few days were a blur of legal maneuvers. The $15,000 appeared in Felicia's trust account with an hour to spare. The vendors, realizing I was not going to buckle, turned their collection efforts squarely on Nathan and Pamela, whose dream wedding had now become a financial nightmare of debt collectors and angry phone calls. I heard through a distant cousin that the happy couple had been forced to move out of their new luxury apartment, unable to make the subsequent payments without my money, and were living in the basement of Pamela's parents' house. The public humiliation they had inflicted on me had boomeranged back with devastating force. The story of the bride who kicked out the mother-in-law who had paid for everything, only to have the wedding cancelled mid-reception, had become a piece of delicious gossip among their social circle. Timothy tried one last time to intervene. He showed up at my front door, his face flushed with anger. I saw him through the peephole, and for a second, a flicker of the old fear returned. But it was just a flicker. I opened the door and stood there, blocking the entrance. "What do you want, Timothy?" I asked, my voice even. "You have to stop this, Betty," he growled. "You're making a fool of Nathan. You're destroying his life." I looked at this man who had hollowed me out for 30 years, who had taught my son that women were disposable, that loyalty was a one-way street. "No, Timothy," I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. "You did that. You taught him that a man doesn't have to stand up for anything. You taught him that a wife's mother is a utility, not a person. He is the man you raised. This is the life he chose. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy." I closed the door in his stunned face. The solid click of the lock, the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a final, complete liberation. In the weeks that followed, I began the quiet, joyful work of rebuilding my life. But this time it was a life built for me. I sold the large family house that was filled with too many ghosts and bought a small, bright condominium with a balcony overlooking a park. I reconnected with the old friends I had neglected, The ones who had been subtly pushed away by Timothy's possessiveness and my own exhaustion. I started taking a pottery class, something I had always wanted to do, and found a simple grounding pleasure in the feel of the clay spinning beneath my hands. I was creating something for the sheer joy of it, not for anyone else's approval. I never heard from Nathan or Pamela directly again. The legal channels fell silent once the debts were settled, presumably by Pamela's wealthy father, who was more concerned with avoiding a public scandal than anything else. My sister Christina sent me a long rambling email full of accusations and guilt-tripping, ending with the plea that I should be the bigger person and forgive. I deleted it without a reply. Forgiveness was a complex thing. I had forgiven myself for my blindness, for my years of self-abandonment. That was the only forgiveness that mattered. I had reclaimed my money, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my dignity. I had reclaimed my peace. I had learned in the most brutal way possible that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and my cup had been empty for far too long. My new life is quiet, but it is not empty. It is full of my own choices, my own joys, my own peace. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over the trees, I think about that day at the wedding. I don't feel anger anymore or even pain. I feel a strange sense of gratitude. That moment of exquisite cruelty was the catalyst I needed. It was the shock to the system that woke me from a lifetime of slumber. Pamela thought she was throwing me away like a piece of trash, but what she really did was set me free. She handed me the key to my own cage, and I finally had the courage to turn it, open the door, and walk out into the sun. What would you do in my place? Have you ever had a moment that changed the entire direction of your life? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. It always brings a smile to my face to see how far these stories travel. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. There are many other stories waiting for you. For those who wish to support the creation of more stories like this one, you can use the Super Thanks feature. Your support means the world to me and allows me to keep sharing these important narratives. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.